Well, hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45, where Jesus' disciples, James and John, ask if they can sit at his right and left hand in heaven. So go ahead and grab a Bible and let's dive in. Now, as always, we've got to start with context in order to fully understand what's going on here. At this point in Jesus' ministry, he's on his way to Jerusalem, where he knows he's going to die. And in fact, in the verses just before today's section, Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to suffer and die. And it's the third time that he's told them this in just the last few chapters. He says this in chapter 10, verse 33 and 34. "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise." Jesus is making it clear to his disciples that this is not going to end the way that they might think it's going to end. He's not going to assume the throne of David the way that they might want or expect. And yet, despite Jesus' repeated teaching that he is going to need to suffer and die, at least a teaching at this point that he's sharing with his disciples, James and John decide it's a good idea to ask him if they can sit at his right and his left hand. We're going to pick it up here in verse 35. "And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.'" Now, this seems like a bold move just to walk up, "Jesus, do what we want," but they've seen this at this point. They've seen it happen over and over again where people come up to Jesus and they ask him for something. Now, generally, they're asking him to be healed or some such, and yet it seems like with Jesus, if you ask, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get what you ask for. And so it might seem like an outlandish question, but after what James and John have seen about Jesus' character, maybe it ought not be that surprising. And so Jesus says to them, verse 36, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they respond to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left hand, in your glory." Now what they're doing here is they're trying to skip right ahead to the glory. Jesus has just told them that he's going to rise from the dead. But first he says that he's going to suffer and die, that he'll be mocked and spat on and flogged and killed. And isn't this so like us? We try to skip over the suffering and get right to the glory. And so Jesus tells them, clear as day, y'all still don't get it. Look at this in verse 38. Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" Now we've got some allusions here, both to past and to future. When Jesus says, "Are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink?" I think it's likely that he's referencing the imagery of the cup of wrath in the Old Testament. A quick search will turn this up for you in Psalms and Jeremiah and Isaiah, Lamentations, Zechariah, this imagery that God's wrath is being held in a cup that's going to overflow and be poured out. It's also hearkening back to Jesus' baptism back in the beginning of chapter Mark, which in turn connects him with the prophesied Messiah of Isaiah 42 and the suffering servant of Isaiah 52. We'll come back to this a little bit later in the video, but it's also worth noting here that we've got both cup and baptism, those sacraments which Jesus has given us, and he mentions them both right here. Now check out the disciples' response. "And they said to him, 'We are able.' And Jesus said to them, 'The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared.'" They respond, "We are able." And Jesus doesn't correct them. He knows that by the power of the Spirit, they are able, and they will, in fact, suffer as his disciples. But the prestige of these positions, that is not Jesus's to give. Jesus here is acknowledging the authority of the Father alone to grant that sort of request. Now in verse 40, we come to the response of the rest of the disciples. Mark writes, "And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John." Can we blame them? In verse 42, "And Jesus called them to him and said to them, 'You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. But even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, in ancient Jewish teaching, Gentiles were often used as a negative example, a way to compare and contrast with what one ought to do with how those pagans do it. And actually, for several centuries here, pagan Gentile rulers had in fact claimed divinity. And they exercised their godlike status by exercising power over their people, lording over them. There's a sense of domination to the word. And Jesus here is setting up a dichotomy. This is the way that rulers of the world operate. This is not how the kingdom of God operates. Jesus, the king in the kingdom of God, doesn't subjugate or dominate or domineer, but rather serves. The sort of authority the Gentiles rule, well, that's not the sort of authority that Jesus exercises. And he makes that clear. It shall not be so among you. The way that Jesus exercises his authority is not power over, but power under. He says, whoever would be great must be your servant. The Greek word for servant there is diakonos. We get the word deacon from it. And then he takes it a step further even. Whoever be first among you must be your slave. The Greek word there is doulos. It's not the same word. If you want to be first, you've got to go even lower. Of course, Jesus has just told them that that's what he's going to do, that he's going to suffer and die. He's going to be mocked and flogged and spat on. He's going to become like a slave in service of others. This is how the Son of Man is. And what Jesus is doing here is he's reinterpreting the Son of Man of Daniel 7 in terms of service. He's redefining lordship in terms of power under. And in doing so, he's establishing and modeling a new sort of leadership. And he tells them again right here in verse 45 that the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. That word for give, didomi in the Greek, is used earlier in the same passage when James and John ask Jesus to give them their request. And well, Jesus can't give them a position at his right hand or his left. What he can do is he can give his life for them. And so we've got Jesus here redefining messianic expectations from power over to power under, lording over and dominating to serving and dying, to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, the word there used for ransom was used usually in the ancient world to describe the act of buying back a prisoner of war or a slave or in order to release someone from a bond. And that's what Jesus, by his death, is going to do for sinners. Now, I can't help but wondering if there might also be a little bit of foreshadowing here. Mark's going to write in just a few chapters, in chapter 14, and Jesus took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." There's an echo there. Here in chapter 10, Jesus talks about the cup, and he talks about his life being a ransom for many. That language is repeated again in Mark 14 in the institution of the Lord's Supper. And so I cannot help but wonder about the connection to the sacraments here. The cup that Jesus is going to drink, the cup of the new covenant, his blood that would be shed for us, the baptism with which he's going to be baptized, which is a death. We Christians celebrate both the cup and baptism, the bread and wine which points to Jesus' death, baptism which reminds us of his death and his resurrection. And James and John, they said to him, "We are able to drink that cup and to be baptized with your baptism." And Jesus responds in the affirmative. "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you too will be baptized, just as we still do today when we celebrate the Lord's Supper and the sacrament of baptism." That's it for today. If this was helpful for you, please do like, share, comment, or subscribe, and we'll see you next time.